This week, CCF's daily devos have been about battling anxiety, and today we're going to cover the text of Psalm 56. But before we start reading the text, I wanted to read the subscript, that little thing that shows up before the first verse. Some psalms have them, some psalms don't, but they kind of sometimes give you a little bit more context as to what's going on in the psalm. And this one I think is particularly helpful. So it says, "For the director of music, to the tune of A Dove on Distant Oaks, of David, a miktam, when the Philistines had seized him in Gath." So what this tells you is that the psalm is attributed to David. And not only that, but it gives you a particular context in his life when the psalm was written. And it says, when the Philistines had seized him in Gath. Now, the thing that's a little bit tricky about this is that there isn't a place like in the Old Testament where you go back through Samuel and it says, and then the Philistines seized David at Gath. That doesn't seem to be happening, but there's some other times when you can look at this and say, well, maybe this is what's going on. There's actually two different times that David is found in Gath, and we're going to concentrate on the very first time. What happens is, this is in 1 Samuel 21. It's right after Saul has started pursuing and trying to kill David. So David has the whole thing where he defeats Goliath, and then he starts being recognized in Israel for his great deeds, and people start praising him and acknowledging him, and Saul starts getting really jealous because he's the king, but people are treating David like he's more important than the king. And so Saul decides, you know what, I would rather just kill David than have him around and be this really important figure in my life. So Saul chases him out of Israel. David is fleeing for his life, and at this point in time, he finds himself in Gath. Now, the significance of Gath, of course, it says the Philistines. It's this place, it's one of the kingdoms, one of the areas that the Philistines have hold of. The Philistines obviously don't like David. He's kind of the reason they were defeated. He took down their champion, not a big fan. So the king of Gath had basically said, oh, this is David. This is the dude that all the Israelites are saying he's really important, and he's basically like the king of Israel. And so Gath, the king of Gath, decides that he wants David killed. So what David does is he acts crazy. He starts salivating. It talks about him having saliva in his beard. He starts marking on the door all these weird symbols and crazy things, and just muttering to himself, doing anything he can to look like a crazy person. And so the king of Gath goes, okay, well, even if that is David, he's clearly just gone insane, so let's not worry about him. And then so David is able to continue on from Gath to another location. So that's kind of what's going on. David is literally fearing for his life to such an extent that he decides, I should just act like a crazy person in order to spare my life. That's kind of the context, what's going on in Psalm 56. And so David writes, I'm going to go ahead and just read the whole psalm. Be merciful to me, O God, for men hotly pursue me. All day long they press their attack. My slanderers pursue me all day long. Many are attacking me in their pride. When I'm afraid, I will trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust. I will not be afraid. What can mortal men do to me? All day long they twist my words. They are always plotting to harm me. They conspire. They lurk. They watch my steps, eager to take my life. On no account let them escape. In your anger, O God, bring down the nations. Record my lament. List my tears in your scroll. Are they not in your record? Then my enemies will turn back when I call for help. By this I will know that God is for me, and God whose word I praise, and the Lord whose word I praise. In God I trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? I'm under vows to you, O God. I will present my thank offerings to you, for you have delivered me from death and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. So a big theme here is David's fear. His fear of the enemies that are pursuing him, his fear of his circumstances, what's come about him, and he just has this fear. The thing that gets tricky about talking about anxiety in scriptural terms is, I don't know if they defined in ancient times anxiety like we do today. I think they would often use words like fear. And so I think David has found himself in a place where he's got this anxiety, because not only is he in the home of the enemy in Gath, but his friend, his mentor, his father-in-law, his king is now trying to kill him, has become his enemy. The guy that should have had his back, the guy that should have been supporting him, the guy that should have been telling him how to live life, has become his enemy and is trying to kill him. And David is fearing for his life. And so he says in this, I have all of this fear. I don't know what the next day holds. I don't know how I'm going to survive this, but I do know, God, I trust you. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me? What can these circumstances can't bring me down? God has, I, I have his trust. I praise him. I am under vows to you, O God. I present my thank offerings to you, for you have delivered me from death and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. I think those are the promises that we are to take from this psalm. That God is for us, that God is working, that God is one who brings life, who brings light, who delivers us from death, our feet from stumbling. And so David is reminded of his vows to God, that the thank offerings that he presents, the things that he does for God. He's reminded of, just his religious practices, that the day in, day out things that he does to worship God. And he says, I know who you are. I have a relationship with you. I give offerings to you. God, I know that you will remember me, even in the times when I am scared, when I fear very much for my life. I trust you, that you are one who I can walk with in the light of life. And so let's remember that we can trust God, that we may have plenty of legitimate things to fear, things that cause us anxiety, things that cause us to spiral, but we can trust in God, that he delivers from death, that we can walk before God in the light of life.